And welcome. My name is Beth Arujo, Marketing Services Leader at GEP. And on today's webinar, I am joined by my esteemed colleagues Avani and Rafiq to speak about the Inflation Reduction Act, how to get a tax credit for your green energy projects. Prior to handing this off to Avni and Rafiq, a few housekeeping reminders. Please feel free to ask questions using the chat functionality. We'll try to address all of the questions, but in the event that we don't have the opportunity to get to your question during the webinar, please rest assured we will follow up with you after the webinar. Now off to you, Avni and Rafiq.
Thank you so much, Beth. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rafiq Merchant. I'm a senior director here at GEP and extremely excited to have an opportunity to connect with you all today. I've been with the organization for over 10 years, really leading many of our larger scale transformation and managed service engagements with a keen focus over the last 18 months on helping drive forward ESG strategies for many of our clients. And today, really looking forward to speaking to you all specifically about the Inflation Reduction Act and how organizations can take advantage of the tax incentives that are available. So really excited to speak with you all. And I wanted to turn it over to my colleague Avni to provide a brief intro for herself as well.
Great, thank you so much, Rafiq. Hi everyone, my name is Avni Prastanya and I'm our business development lead for GEP's ESG practice. And as Rafiq mentioned, very excited to chat with you all today to really, outline what's potentially available to a lot of clients and prospective companies through the Inflation Reduction Act and specifically the advanced energy project credits that you have today. I have previously worked with a lot of companies in these procurement transformation projects to assess how they can embed sustainability a lot more. And it's very exciting to think about now how, through the Inflation Reduction Act, there are far more credits that are available to help finance and incentivize the move over to renewable energy and greenhouse gas emissions reductions.
Thank you so much, Avni. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and jump into sort of the meat of our presentation for today. And what we'll really be doing is walking the group through essentially what the Inflation Reduction Act is, providing a bit of an overview, but then going into the specifics around how your organization can potentially take advantage of some of the tax incentives available specifically through the Advanced Energy Project, what some of those timelines are, what are going to be the key critical elements for submission, and then hopefully have a little bit of time at the end to take some questions as well. So with that, before jumping directly into the IRA or the Inflation Reduction Act, I did want to share that there was two previous pieces of legislation that were passed starting in 2021, which was the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which essentially provided about $1.2 trillion in federal funding to really expand on infrastructure projects within the United States. So things related to Department of Transportation, highway, broadband, clean energy, and then that also enabled the second act, which was the CHIPS and Science Act, which was passed in August of 2022, that was geared around providing, again, nearly $250 billion in federal funding to really fund semiconductor chip manufacturing in the United States. And then towards sort of August 2022, we had the passing of the Inflation Reduction Act. And the combination of these three acts adds about $2 trillion of federal funding that is going to be made available to organizations to really drive and increase the utilization of clean energy here in the US. And so again, that $2 trillion is going to be made available to corporations and consumers alike over the next 10 years. So now jumping directly into the Inflation Reduction Act, there is about $500 billion in new spending or federal funding that is going to be made available to corporations and consumers alike in the form of tax breaks that are going to help boost clean energy, but also reduce healthcare costs, increase tax revenues, help support sort of or individuals in disadvantaged communities, and also employ displaced workers. So the ambition of the IRA or the Inflation Reduction Act, it goes beyond just clean energy, and there is an allocation of nearly $500 billion to really drive efforts in many of those categories that I just described. Just to highlight how sort of innovative this legislation is and how critical it is. There was recent modeling that was actually completed by an independent research provider called the Rhodium Group, and they highlighted the substantial impact that the IRA legislation has the capacity to make over sort of the next 10 years or even by 2030. If we were to assume a business as usual scenario, the United States right now is on track to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by roughly 24 to about 35% by 2030 when compared to 2005 levels. Through the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, those incentives that are going to be passed on by the act, the Rhodium Group believes that now that greenhouse gas reduction would increase to 31 to 44% by 2030. So again, just highlighting sort of, again, the impact of the IRA and the funding that's going to be made available to really incentivize and catalyze sort of the green energy journey here within the US. Now, within the IRA, right, there's nearly $400 billion in federal funding to really fund sort of expansion of clean energy projects with the goal of really driving reduction in the nation's carbon footprint and emissions over the next 10 years. And those incentives are going to be provided through sort of a mix of incentives, grants, and loan guarantees. In fact, of that nearly $400 billion or so, over 200 billion is going to be made available to corporations. So they are going to be the biggest recipient of the tax incentives that are available. And it's really to catalyze, again, private investments in clean energy, in manufacturing, in transportation. Now, one of the most interesting parts about this, so that although there's sort of $200 billion in available funding over the next 10 years, the interesting aspect is that as part of the IRA, it reinstituted Act 48C or Section 48C, which represents the advanced energy projects. And these projects, when the act was passed, was really established to drive and expand essentially manufacturing entities or organizations that were producing specifically renewable energy. So think wind, solar, geothermal, fuel cells, carbon capture, again, with the emphasis and focus on organizations or institutions that were producing clean energy. However, in February of 2023, February 13th to be exact, this section was revised by the federal government with an allocation of $10 billion to expand the amount of sort of, again, organizations that can take advantage of this tax credit to now also include corporations that are manufacturing energy storage systems, electric grid modernization equipment, electric and hybrid vehicles, refueling infrastructure, but also any organization that re-equips a manufacturing facility with equipment designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 20%. So this last component was a fundamental change within the regulation that now will enable, in our opinion, a significant amount of organizations here in the United States to take advantage of the tax credits available, as long as they're looking to revamp their manufacturing infrastructure to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 20%. Now, this entire effort is taking place with sort of the Department of the Treasury Department, in conjunction with the Department of Energy and the IRS, where of that $10 billion that's going to be made available immediately, $4 billion of that is specifically going to be dedicated to projects associated with energy communities. So again, if you have a project that essentially reduces your carbon footprint by at least 20% across your facility, you would be able to take advantage of this incentive. Now, one thing I will call out is that while the opportunity immediately is around $4 billion of incentives that organizations can take advantage of in 2023, do keep in mind that over the next 10 years, over the next decade, there will be $200+ billion in federal funding that is going to be made available, and additional guidance will continue to be provided later in 2023 and beyond of how sort of organizations will be able to take advantage of those incentives. So this is certainly just the beginning, and through our webinar today, we really want to highlight how your organization can think about taking advantage of these credits, what are going to be the respective qualifying projects and what that means, what is sort of, again, the method of being able to submit your entry and providing a concept paper to the Department of Energy, and then ultimately we'll certainly talk through some of the timelines as well. So hopefully that gives you all a bit of guidance and a bit of an overview of what the IRA is, but more importantly, what the advanced energy project credits are and how you can take advantage of that. And with that, I'll certainly turn it over to Avni to share a little bit more about what are some of those qualifying projects.
Thanks so much, Rafiq. As Rafiq just mentioned, I mean, taking advantage of these incentives is absolutely instrumental to accelerating that clean energy transition and lowering greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. And so the advanced energy project credits are available for select projects that qualify under 3 broad buckets. And I'll spend a couple minutes diving into each of those now. So the first bucket is the clean energy manufacturing and recycling project. These are projects that are specifically focused on expanding US manufacturing capacity and quality, as well as supporting jobs in clean energy technology. The second bucket that we'll have is greenhouse gas emissions reduction projects, which are projects focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the industrial sector. And the last bucket is critical material projects. And these are projects that help secure domestic supply chains for critical materials that serve as inputs for clean technology production. So diving into, a couple of examples of what each of these project types would entail. We've of course got a very small sample list of projects here, but there is far more guidance that's available from the Advanced Energy Project Credits documentation that has been released by the Department of Energy. But to summarize for the purposes of this webinar, the first bucket, clean energy manufacturing and recycling projects, these projects would involve the direct establishing or expansions or re-equipment of sites for renewable energy production. So focused on renewable energy production, energy storage systems, electric grid modernization, and property and infrastructure projects that are producing energy conservation technologies or electric vehicle production components as well. So really examples in this space, as you can see on the slide as well, would include projects focused on the production of solar panels or wind turbines, or even the recycling of carbon capture equipment. So, again, this bucket involves the production of clean energy, as well as the recycling and the propagation of clean energy tech. The second bucket is potentially the bucket with the broadest application across corporations, and it is the bucket where you did have some of those recent updates that Rafiq was mentioning in February of this year. This could involve several companies based in the US with large manufacturing facilities that are thinking about re-equipping their industrial and manufacturing facilities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions overall. This typically could include energy incentive manufacturing sectors, such as automotive or chemicals. But specifically, the idea here is any broad base of corporations that do have manufacturing facilities in the US that specifically are looking at optimizing either their equipment or the processes used in manufacturing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 20%, these projects would be available and eligible to take advantage of the tax credits mentioned here. So largely, what does this bucket entail? This looks into low or zero carbon process heating systems, carbon capture and storage systems, energy efficiencies, and reductions in waste from industrial processes. The biggest, most exciting bucket here is, or sub-bucket here is technology innovations to reduce emissions as well. So examples of this could include the installation of, for example, a low carbon heating system, such as an electric heat pump or waste heat recovery. For carbon capture equipment, this could include the equipment necessary to compress, treat, process, or perform a physical action to capture carbon oxides, and then subsequently the materials needed to store these. So that would include carbon dioxide pipelines or monitoring equipment. And finally, you also can look at energy efficient transportation systems or other technologies that reduce energy use in the manufacturing process. So projects that you have to revamp and re-equip your facilities with combined heat and power systems, or smart energy management tools, or advanced recycling approaches. these would all be projects that fall into the second bucket. And again, this is the potentially the broadest application for US corporations with significant manufacturing facilities in the US that can now think about their overall emissions reduction roadmap. We do have a third bucket for critical material projects, and these projects typically involve the optimizing of processing, refining, and recycling of critical materials. And critical materials are those that serve as inputs to clean energy production. This list includes a list of about 50 minerals deemed by the Secretary of the Interior, acting through the Director of the US Geological Survey, which was updated in 2022. And their analysis to classify these materials as critical evaluated a number of components, including the supply risk and points of failure in the US value chain, the potential dependency of the US manufacturing sector on foreign supplies of these materials, and the likely growth in demand for this material in clean energy technology moving forward. So examples of critical materials here and minerals here could include aluminum, lithium, zinc, and zirconium. But again, there's that broader list of 50 minerals that is available online that you can all reference. So examples of projects that could qualify here in this bucket would include the production of lithium-ion batteries, or the production of rare earth or permanent magnets for wind turbines. Again, the idea here is that we're securing the US supply chain for these materials that are then subsequently used in the production of clean energy tech. So that was hopefully a brief summary of the different types of projects, again, that could qualify for these incentives, noting the second bucket here of greenhouse gas emission reduction projects is probably the one with the broadest application. But if your company is involved in clean energy manufacturing and recycling projects, or involved in different components of the supply chain that involve critical material projects, there are opportunities for you to take advantage of these tax credits. So now that we've discussed examples of projects that could qualify, I'll chat through a breakdown of the tax credits available to take advantage of. And I'm going to keep this overview quite high level and simple, because of course, if you'd like to know more, feel free to reach out to our team, but there are a lot of details that are involved in the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as the documentation around the Advanced Energy Project Credits documentation that detail out exactly how your company can take advantage of this. But if you reach out to us as well after, we'd be happy to connect you with our team of subject matter experts that can provide that detailed breakdown. But I'll start with the broadest high-level overview that we can here. And at that level, there are two types of project credits available. There are investment tax credits and production tax credits. And these are tax credits that have existed before. And as Rafiq mentioned, there have been several pieces of legislation recently that have expanded those. But the recent changes in the Inflation Reduction Act have expanded these to be the broadest base of credits available for companies to take advantage of. So it's really an exciting opportunity for you to consider accelerating your green energy transition. I do also want to note, before we go into the details of each, that certain projects can be eligible for investment tax credits or production tax credits, but not both. The idea is that, if you have solar and wind technologies or municipal solid waste projects, those would be eligible for either type of tax credit. But if you are focused on projects that do consider energy storage technologies, or again, that transition to clean energy that look at combined heat and power grids or microturbines, those would primarily only be eligible for the investment tax credits. And then any energy that does involve the actual production of green energy, such as a hydroelectric project, that would be eligible for a production tax credit. So really, it is key for corporations to, internally assess or perhaps leverage external expertise to determine which of these buckets of tax credits they can take advantage of. And then with that, you can look at unlocking the maximum amount of tax credit potentially available. And that's really where the exciting opportunity lies. From an investment tax credit standpoint, companies can take advantage of as much as 70% in investment tax credits against that initial investment amount for a renewable energy project or an emissions reduction project. And on the production tax credit side, you can take advantage of up to 3.2 cents per kilowatt of renewable energy produced. This is through a credit value when prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements are met, as well as a series of bonus adders when specific conditions are met, as you can see on the screen. So now I'll go into the details of each of these types of credit options. So first, the investment tax credit. That depends on the amount in dollars of capital investment in renewable energy or emissions reduction projects. There is a base credit, again, with the requirement to meet the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements of the locality in which the project is based, as determined by the Department of Labor. And then that base credit then does reach approximately 30%. There are incremental bonuses and credits that may be leveraged though, if a project meets additional criteria. So for example, the domestic content adder unlocks an additional 10% if the project supports scaling domestic production or procurement. So notably, if 100% of the steel or iron components and at least 40% of manufactured product components are produced in the US that are used in your project, then you could unlock that additional 10% of tax incentives. Additionally, if the project is located in an energy community, so for example, think a coal or mining community, or a brownfield site where the expansion or redevelopment of renewable energy can be complicated by the potential presence of a hazardous substance or pollutant. This could unlock another 10%. And then finally, if the project is in a low-income community or is part of a low-income residential property, that unlocks incremental chunks of 10% each. However, this section is a specific bonus that is applicable only to the investment tax credit setup. And this only applies for now to wind, solar PV, and energy storage combined with wind or solar PV projects that meet a certain criteria. So, really here, the key takeaway is that planning that broader impact project that not only advances the investment in green and renewable energy, but also one that potentially supports domestic job creation and economic growth in communities where it is necessary as we transition to different sources of energy, that they get that additional support. Really planning for that broader impact project has an immense advantage of maximizing the potential tax credit benefits available. So that was the investment tax credit, and I'll briefly touch upon the incentive to maximize production of renewable energy through production tax credits. Again, a very similar setup to the investment tax credits, where you start again with a base tax credit as long as you meet the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, which give about 2.6 cents per kilowatt hours of energy generated by your project by fulfilling, again, the criteria that we mentioned earlier. And then you will again have similar bonus adders, so domestic content, promoting component manufacturing in the US, and the energy community requirement to help bolster and offset potential losses with the transition of energy sources. They continue to be key components that you can use to unlock additional benefits. So you can again get up to 3.2 cents in tax benefits per kilowatt hour of green energy produced. So that hopefully gave you all a good summary of the different types of projects that can qualify, as well as the breakdown of the incentives that are available to be leveraged by your company for your projects focused on moving to renewable green energy, as well as focused on reducing your greenhouse gas emissions. But I'll pass it over to Rafik again to talk through the actual process of qualifying, applying, and getting approval for these credits.
Thanks so much, Avni. Thanks for that great overview as well. And so we wanted to spend a little bit of time, now that you have an understanding of what the IRA is, what the advanced energy credits and projects are, what are some of the qualifying projects and the different buckets in which those projects can be allocated for you to take advantage of these credits. The reason we wanted to communicate with you all today is we really, it is a very timely sort of period to be able to take advantage of the tax credits available. The reason why is that on May 31st specifically, the Department of Energy will open sort of their period of allowing submissions of a concept paper by organizations, or really tax-paying entities here in the United States, that they will start evaluating. And that evaluation period, or that open period for an organization to be able to submit their concept paper, is going to be from May 31st to July 31st. But before going into the details of sort of, again, what that concept paper submission is, really I wanted to take a step back and say, organizations now have between now and let's say July 31st to really think through sort of, again, the preparation of these concept papers that are to be submitted. What the Department of Energy is really looking for is, again, a robust understanding of you or your organization to be able to submit a detailed sort of prospectus around what your relevant reduction opportunities are going to be, exactly how you're going to drive that reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, or if you are a current producer of renewable or clean energy, what are going to be those qualifying elements, and really going into a lot of those technical details, understanding what those specific initiatives are going to be, understanding your existing baseline today so that you can then adequately showcase that ability to reduce and meet that sort of threshold of 20% if you are looking to drive down carbon emissions to be eligible. And so what you see on the left of the screen right now are going to be all of the different focus areas that, again, the Department of Energy is going to evaluate. The sort of primary one really being sort of the reduction in air pollution, the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and being able to showcase that, validate that, and theoretically prove that you have a plan and a roadmap to be able to drive that reduction through the relevant revamping of your existing infrastructure. But in addition to that, to take advantage of any of the other incremental adder incentive tax credits, there are these other aspects that the DOE is also going to evaluate. Understanding if there's any sort of impact to domestic job creation, domestic sourcing, if there's the utilization of steel or iron or aluminum that is based out of or produced out of the United States, or if your product that you are manufacturing has 40% of the raw materials that are domestically sourced. That community impact, if you are in an energy community, if you are sort of driving renewable energy in an area that historically has been considered a coal mine, or any of those aspects are also going to be evaluated, in addition to, again, overall technology innovation, efficiencies from a supply chain standpoint. All of that is going to need to be considered when establishing and creating the concept paper that you want to ultimately submit to the DOE. And you want to ensure that this concept paper is really robust. And the reason why I say that is, once you are able to submit your concept paper through what the DOE calls their exchange portal between May 31st and July 31st, the DOE will then first conduct their evaluation at a preliminary level of understanding, one, have you met overall the criteria that have been established as per the legislation and regulation? Have you met the eligibility requirements, at least at a high level? Does your project qualify? Does it have commercial viability? And based off of that initial submission, they're going to generate what's called either a letter of encouragement or a letter of discouragement. And that letter of encouragement is going to showcase if they are encouraging you to submit your application, which is called the 48C application, to essentially obtain some of the tax incentives, which is going to be a more detailed and robust submission that is going to require a much more sort of technical sort of feasibility and a technical sort of submission, in addition to what you've submitted as part of the concept paper. Now, in addition, there's also a possibility that the DOE sends you a letter of discouragement. And in the case that that happens, any sort of individuals that have been denied the opportunity or been discouraged to submit can essentially request time for a debriefing. But more importantly, even if you receive a letter of discouragement, it does not sort of ban you from being able to submit an application to the DOE for evaluation. However, if you do not submit a concept paper between this deadline of May 31st and July 31st, you cannot submit an application to the DOE for evaluation. So again, I think it's a critical sort of juncture where we're at right now, where over the next 6 to 8 weeks, organizations have this opportunity to really think through building out, conducting their roadmaps of what those specific initiatives are going to be that are driving down the reduction in carbon emissions, and then ultimately documenting that in a format that's going to be acceptable by the DOE. Once that sort of, again, concept paper is submitted, as I mentioned, there will be an opportunity for the DOE to start evaluating post that close period of July 31st, and they will provide organizations with either a letter of encouragement or discouragement. Based off of that, you will then have the opportunity to ultimately submit your robust application, right? Here, they're going to be looking in detail what the technical requirements are, understanding, again, that the information that you've provided ultimately meets the overall program guidance. Have you met the mandatory sort of, again, requirements to be able to do so? And then also evaluating just a thorough examination of the overall project itself. Now, once, let's say, your application has been submitted and it has ultimately been approved, you would then move on to what's called the approval and certification stage. Now, in that section or in that stage, right, based again on the regulation, each applicant that has been approved for essentially the certification, you pretty much have 2 years from the date of acceptance by the Treasury to be able to provide the Treasury Department and Department of Energy with evidence that the requirements of the certification have been met. So every applicant will receive a certification, has 2 years, again, from the date of issuance of that certificate to then showcase if the overall project has then been put into service. So let me repeat that one more time just for clarity. So once your application, let's say, has been approved, there will be a 2-year period in which the organization would have to provide the Department of Treasury with essentially the required sort of requirements and all the relevant details to show that the certification levels have been met. Once that has been done, the organization will have another 2 years from that date of the issuance of their certification to be able to put the project in service and then ultimately notify the Treasury that the project has been placed in service. Only when that is done will the organization be eligible to receive the estimated tax credits or the incentives. If for any reason the project is not placed in service within that 2-year period, that certification will no longer be valid. And if any certification ultimately is revoked, the total amount that you would have been allocated in terms of credits under Section 48C would ultimately be increased by the amount of credits in Section 48C with respect to that revoked certification. So again, it is imperative to ensure that once you have been provided the certification, once your project has been approved, that within that 2-year time frame, your project does go into service as well. So just a few components that we wanted to highlight here in terms of the overall timeline. But what I will say is that this period of May 31st to July 31st is the critical element right now that organizations should be considering in terms of getting their concept paper submitted to the Department of Energy. And again, this is an area where we certainly have a lot of experience in helping many of our clients do this today and can help organizations sort of expedite that. But before you're able to submit that concept paper, there is a typical roadmap or a sort of amount of activities that would need to be completed so that you can be in a position to effectively submit a robust concept paper. And I'll certainly let Avni talk a little bit through that as well.
Definitely. So, we've chatted through the exciting amounts of incentives that are available to companies to get started, but how do you actually get started? Or if you already have a plan in place, how can you mobilize to ensure that you actually do meet that concept paper submission deadline and maximize your potential tax credits and benefits? We have limited time to act because that submission window opens May 31st to July 31st. So here we've outlined a very high-level approach and plan for an accelerated 6 to 8 week effort that you would need to complete an overarching strategy assessment, as well as develop that feasibility assessment and roadmap to be leveraged in your concept paper submission. Given that accelerated timeline that you see here with the activities, it's a significant amount of work that every company does need to go through. Hopefully, a lot of you have already started that journey, but it does help in order to accelerate to have an expert partner like GEP guide you through this journey, because we can help tap into our community of subject matter experts, leverage our toolkits and databases, and help you more efficiently get your broader teams mobilized. But of course, this timeline is simply indicative. We wanted to focus on the types of steps and activities needed, as Rafiq mentioned, but every company does have their unique needs, as well as cross-functional alignment requirements, as well as priorities in terms of which of those buckets they want to focus on: the clean energy manufacturing bucket, the greenhouse gas emissions reduction bucket, or the critical materials project buckets, or a combination of the three or of two. So again, I will start with the overall approach, But these are indicative in terms of the types of steps that a company should follow. And we recognize that many companies are at different stages in this journey. But it starts really with that alignment of your current energy and emissions baselines. It's important to understand where you are at today to determine, where you can get to and what it will take to get you there. So this includes mobilizing your different stakeholder groups and reviewing your current baseline data, as well as aligning on priority areas to target and align on timelines. When do you want to have the transitions in your manufacturing facilities over to newer technology, newer equipment that you can use to actually lower your greenhouse gas emissions? Is that the right priority area to target today? Or is there a different stakeholder group that already has projects in place that you could mobilize that actually meet a quicker timeline? Those are the types of questions that you really need to make sure that some sort of task force or group that's assigned to evaluate which projects your company can submit to the IRA for qualification of these tax credits. These are the important questions that group needs to answer before to get everyone aligned on what the approach and plan can be before you get started. But then I think a key component here is moving on to analyzing your potential areas of opportunity. So really completing a feasibility assessment almost and evaluating what energy efficiency strategies or decarbonization strategies or overall greenhouse gas emission reduction strategies your team can leverage. And that's going to involve a fair amount of work and represents the biggest set of activities that we have here. This typically does involve a detailed internal as well as external analysis to benchmark where your operations are at today, to explore any state or local nuances that you can incorporate. Again, remember there were some bonus adders that are associated with the location of your projects, whether they are in energy communities or whether they are in low income areas. So, it's important to understand what the feasibility is and the advantage is of leveraging some of those different location strategies. And then overall, the biggest component here is you need to identify the key abatement levers that your teams can take advantage of through these different projects in order to actually lower greenhouse gas emissions or look at accelerating that transition to clean energy. So it's important to generate that list of levers that are potentially available for you to take advantage of, for you to implement across your manufacturing facilities. But you also do need to include in that some sort of feasibility assessment to work through the financial implications, the technical and resource feasibility of actually implementing those levers, and use that to generate a prioritization method. Because as Rafiq mentioned earlier, you have a limited window in which you can apply to at least qualify for these tax incentives, but then you can, of course, submit a more robust plan in the actual application of submission of your concept papers and your projects. So there, you do want to outline that roadmap of taking advantage of these tax credits that really are unlocked over the next 10 years, because the globe has that urgency to act by 2030 as well as by 2050 to hit net zero. So if you can show that longer term plan as well as that prioritization of which projects you would be tackling first and how those have that knock-on effect on future projects, that's really key and is an important part here of developing that overall strategy and roadmap. And of course, the identification of those strategies is incomplete without an impact analysis to determine what that potential positive outcome is. You do need to show a material amount of progress from your baseline in order to highlight the benefits that you're generating, not only for your own corporation's operations, but for the community in which the projects will take place. Finally, once you have the different strategies aligned on, and once you've identified the approach to centralize and prioritize these strategies, as well as execute and measure them, we then move on to developing that cohesive roadmap that needs to be converted into a concept paper. Again, this can include a single project or several number of projects. Typically, the clients that we've worked with are looking at a combined approach of several projects to maximize both clean energy manufacturing benefits as well as greenhouse gas emissions reduction benefits. There are a couple more details that are expected to come out around the exact concept paper requirements around the end of May, right before the submission window starts to open. So teams should also be flexible and able to move quickly to adapt to that concept paper format and incorporate any changes needed once we learn more. But again, it is key to at least get these efforts and these activities underway, significantly underway, if not already, in order to make sure that you can take advantage of that window. July 31st is really the key deadline to remember, because post that deadline, again, if your company did not submit a concept paper to be qualified, then you would not be able to actually submit the subsequent application in order to take advantage of these credits. So, we are thinking through these levels of activities and these types of steps to make sure that you're ready in advance of that final guidance. And with that, we can look to wrap up soon and open it up to additional questions. But we did want to just end on this note here, that again, GEP is here to help guide your company through this process, because we do have our team of experts ready to help you capture the most value that you can from the Inflation Reduction Act, if your team has not already mobilized your efforts to do that. We do come with extensive expertise in integrating sustainability into companies' operations, their procurement and supply chain processes, as well as actually following through to execute on those, to measurably show that you can make a tangible impact on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, or to accelerate that transition to clean energy. And so that's why, we really hope that you've at least gotten a more detailed overview than you previously already had about the IRA Act, and specifically the advanced energy project credits available there for you to take advantage of. And we also wanted to make sure that we talked through the application process and the steps it takes to prepare for that concept paper submission, which for which the window opens May 31st to July 31st. So Rafiq, is there anything else you wanted to add before we open it up to questions?
Thank you so much, Avni. I'd say, yeah, I think you covered most of those aspects. Again, what we wanted to leave you all with is, there's a lot of activity in the space. This is certainly a keen time to try and take advantage of that. And in order to submit, again, an effective, robust submission, organizations will need to have a cross-functional partnership. This is something where procurement is working with engineering, working with plant managers to understand, again, capital budgets, capital projects that are going to ultimately need to be implemented to take advantage of these tax credits. But again, the intent, right, of the legislation is to really help organizations expedite their journey to greener energy, to clean energy, and really being here to subsidize or catalyze that a little bit through the incentives being provided. We hope the session was informative for you all. If you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to let us know. We'd love to speak more, but thank you all so much for listening as well. And I'll turn it over to Beth to see if there's any questions or any closing remarks.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for your insights and information. There are a couple questions coming in, so I'm just going to read it out, and then you guys can figure out amongst yourselves who wants to take their first stab at it. The first one that's come in is this open to only companies that are manufacturing or producing energy?
Sure. I can certainly take that one, Abdi, if that's okay. So
Sure.
that's a great question. Again, I think when the legislation was originally passed, right, in August of 2022, and then when it went live in sort of January of 2023, originally the legislation was specifically focused on organizations that are producing renewable energy, right? So this was wind, solar, geothermal, etc. However, in February of sort of 2023, that legislation was revised so that Section 48C also encompasses, in addition to organizations that are producing green energy, but also other corporations that are manufacturing either energy storage systems, electrical grid modernization equipment, the manufacturing of electrical or hybrid vehicles, any sort of refueling infrastructure, battery manufacturing, but then also this last component, which was equipment that re-equips manufacturing facilities with equipment designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 20%. So to specifically answer the question is no, this is not only applicable to sort of organizations or corporations that are producing green energy. The new scope enables it to be a much broader implication where any organization that has operations in the United States that is paying tax in the United States can take advantage of the tax credits as long as they are looking to revamp their production infrastructure that is going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 20%. That is a key threshold to keep in mind, that when submitting the concept papers, when submitting any of the collateral and documentation, there needs to be a use case and justification that showcases how you're reducing that greenhouse gas emission by 20%, which is going to be critical.
Great, thank you, Rafiq. The next question that's come in is, our company hasn't gone through a carbon emissions baselining or target setting process. Can we still complete that work in time to apply for these credits?
Definitely. That's a great question. And Rafiq, I can maybe take a stab at this one. You can see if there's anything else you want to add. But, you know, we have GEP, we have worked with several clients that are at different stages of this process of embarking on their ESG and specifically their sustainability journeys. So if your company is in the position where you have not yet gone through a carbon emissions baselining process, I think that is definitely a critical first step to start with. Again, keeping in mind that the submission window opens May 31st and runs till July 31st. You do have time, but it's not a lot. So you should be looking to accelerate that process of baselining your greenhouse gas emissions, so not just carbon, but looking at your overall baseline, and then evaluating what are feasible targets to set in order to make sure that you can identify that right set of projects that can actually help you achieve those targets. So typically, you know, that process of baselining and target setting does take a couple of weeks. So thinking through the timeline that we were talking about earlier, those are a couple of pre-steps that do need to be done in order to make sure that everyone is on the same page of where current state for your company's operations are and where you can potentially get to in order to contribute to the overarching carbon neutral and net zero goals that you know a lot of companies as well as countries have set for themselves. So it is possible to do, but again, it does need to be completed in an accelerated fashion. And so if your company hasn't gone through that exercise, we would recommend working with an expert partner such as GEP to really, you know, make sure that you are completing that assessment in a comprehensive manner, but as well as tapping into the toolkits and templates that we already have to make sure that you can accelerate that in time to make at least the end of that submission window at July 31st.
Great, thank you so much, Avni. Our next audience question that has come in is the only opportunity for applying for all 10 years of incentives, this May 31st to July 31st, or will there be an additional window in future years?
Certainly. I'd say, yeah, there are going to be additional windows in certain years, right? And so, as I mentioned, I think at the start of this discussion, there's going to be nearly, you know, what we're projecting is around over $200 billion in incentives that are going to be made available to corporations over the next decade or over the next 10 years. Now, of that, the advanced energy sort of credits and the advanced energy projects under section 48CE enable about, you know, $10 billion that have been allocated. Of that, the $4 billion right now that are available for organizations to take advantage of in this immediate round one cycle, right, of sort of May 31st to July 31st. Now, there has been guidance provided by the government that there will be additional communication that is provided for what the requirements will be for future rounds. And so there will certainly be additional opportunities. This is sort of that first window, this first round, as sort of, again, the government is calling it round one, that organizations will be eligible to take advantage of the $4 billion in available tax credits. But there will be additional opportunities, certainly, in future years.
Mm-hmm. And Rafiq, I'd just like to add there that, you know, although as Rafiq mentioned, there is additional guidance that we are expecting about those requirements for future rounds. One piece of guidance that the government has already shared today is that, you know, they are using this first period, this first submission period from May 31st to July 31st to also assess what those criteria as well as the opportunity for impact looks like for subsequent rounds. So it is important to, at least from your company's standpoint, demonstrate the interest in applying in this first round one in order to improve your chances of taking advantage of more of those tax credits through subsequent rounds. So this really is a critical one, but it's definitely the first of many rounds of submissions that will be made available.
Great, thank you guys so much. The next one that has come in, we're getting lots of questions, which is awesome. Is there a requirement that the technologies that are being implemented to reduce GHGE be made publicly available / marketed to others going forward?
That is a great question. And really here, the overall advanced energy project credits are being made available to accelerate the US's transition to clean energy. So while it is not an explicit requirement to make sure that technology that your company is investing in can help improve or accelerate that transition to clean energy, it would be a huge benefit to make that available to more of a public market. Because again, you're looking at two natures of buckets here to take advantage of these tax credits. You're looking at your own clean energy production if you are an energy producer, but then you're also looking at the overall investment in and movement of funds to clean energy tech. So if your company can help with that first bucket of actually producing more clean energy through that technology, that is great. But if you can also expand that to a public-facing market so that more companies can take advantage of it, that does help with, again, that acceleration of the transition to clean energy. So although there's no explicit guidance around that, we could assume that there is a significant benefit in highlighting that that is the potential, future state journey or future state roadmap for your project in that initial concept paper.
Great. The next question is, what does the approval and certification process entail? Are there any additional criteria we need to continue to maintain?
Yeah, so I think, again, highlighting this, once sort of a concept paper has been submitted, there will be an opportunity for essentially organizations or the DOE to evaluate the concept papers and then essentially provide a letter of encouragement to go ahead and submit the formal application. Now, once that formal application has been submitted and it ultimately does get approved, there will then be what's called the certification period. So after sort of that formal date of approval or the date of acceptance that has happened, right, that is provided by the Department of Treasury, the applicant or the organization will essentially have a 2-year window to showcase and provide all of the requirements that ensure that the certification has been met, right? And so there's going to be this first window of a 2-year period post-approval where, the applicant does have to showcase that, okay, here are all the requirements that we had submitted as part of our application, and all of those applications have been met as per the certification. Now, once that has taken place and that evidence has been provided to Department of Treasury along with the DOE, there will then be another 2-year period that from, again, receiving sort of confirmation on certification, that from that date of issuance, that the organization now has to place that project in service. So post-certification, again, a 2-year period for the organization to actually place the project in service, showcase the tangible benefits that are coming from the project, and ensuring that those benefits are in line with what was originally projected. And all of that has to happen sort of in that 2-year time frame post-certification, and only then will the organization then be provided with the relevant tax incentives or credits that had been agreed upon for the project. Now, so that is certainly very important to keep in mind. If that project is not placed in service within that 2-year period, there is sort of the potential of the certification no longer being valid or ultimately being revoked. That's a critical element. And then in addition to that, I would also say the location at which the project is being placed in service is also going to be an important factor to ensure that it's not materially different from what was originally provided in the concept paper and then ultimately the application that was submitted to the DOE as well. So again, those are some of the critical factors that I would also keep in mind post sort of approval stage.
Great. Next question, because I know we're getting close on time. Does GEP only help a company come up with the initial concept paper and strategy, or can you help us execute our decarbonization plan?
Definitely, that's a great question, and I can take a stab at starting there, Rafiq, but please feel free to
Sure.
add in. But GEP has extensive experience in both the strategy, development, as well as implementation or execution of sustainable operations. So when you think about the initial concept paper and strategy and roadmap that we would develop in order to submit to the DOE to take advantage of those tax credits, you will need that subsequent execution prowess to demonstrate that you're making that progress. Because as Rafiq mentioned, it is important to have that project in place and in service within a 2-year period to maintain that qualification. So if there is the need to tap into an external partner to help execute against that plan, GEP can definitely help, because we do have extensive experience of that on the ground execution when it comes to embedding sustainability or decarbonization efforts across your supply chain, across your procurement and your broader operations, as well as measuring what is the subsequent progress that each of your manufacturing facilities are making against those targets. So we have a variety of team members and as well as platforms to help with that process. So we could definitely do that.
Yeah, and I just add to that is the fact that, yes, from an execution perspective, understanding the nuances of what needs to be provided back post-approval is also critical in ensuring that your organization does in fact receive the tax credits that were originally agreed upon, right? And so making sure that, one, you're providing the relevant requirements to showcase and confirm that certification, but then there is a finite amount of time of actually mobilizing and executing and implementing the project. And so in many of the clients that we've worked with in the past, that requires a certain level of PMO support. It may require a certain level of change management and ultimately adoption to mobilize on that capital project to be able to execute it within the time frame that the DOE is providing here to be able to, again, take advantage, right? So in addition to what Avni mentioned, these are other critical elements that, again, you may need to have some dedicated resources that are tracking and managing and monitoring, where if you don't have that capability internally, that's certainly something we have experience with, but just wanted to make sure that that's a frame of reference and critical aspect that you all keep in mind as you think about embarking on this journey to take advantage of some of these tax incentives.
Well, thank you so much, Avni and Rafiq, for your time and insights. You unpacked a lot in our short time here, and several takeaways that I took from the discussion is, as of February 2023, the IRA Act has unlocked up to $4 billion in tax credits to companies, both manufacturing and supporting the progress to renewable energy and reductions of carbon emissions. The period to submit concept papers to check eligibility for these credits opens on May 31st and runs until July 31st. And GEP has a highly integrated ESG, supply chain, and procurement experience to help you develop your initial strategy and draft a concept paper in time for this deadline. If you'd like to gain even more insights into our sustainability practice at GEP, our call to action to you is to check out our recently published content, which you can find by visiting gep.com. And thanks again so much for joining, and we look forward to you joining us on our next webinar.
Thank you all.
Thank you
we
all.
Certainly appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you.